So welcome to the session on identifying a topic, and I know that you're all in different places, so let me just kind of ask up front, who in here feels like they have a really kind of solid foundation on what they think their topic of dissertation is going to be? So three solid and a couple of
I'm broad still.
So kind of like the concept, but not. Okay, and that's good. That's good, because that's what we want you to do, and you've been hearing this whole thing, you know, throughout your sessions here about how we start big and come small. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and I'm going to give you some ideas of some things that you can do. So when you're searching for a topic, there's a lot of things that a lot of ways that you can search for that. So we've talked about having your own interests or your own passions, okay? And that's really even what you heard from Dr. Churlios yesterday and Dr. White-Pugh, is to make sure that it's something that you enjoy, because you're gonna live it, okay? From the time you start to the time you finish is gonna vary, but a common thread for people who have done a dissertation is that it's not something that you can just go and do quickly, okay? So you know that you're going to be spending time, you know that you're going to be reading a ton of material, you know that you're going to be looking at a ton of research that relates to it. So you want to make sure that it's something that you enjoy doing. That's the bottom line. As far as other sources go, where you can kind of look at things that might pique your interest, professional journals, oral defenses of a peer. Now, yesterday we were talking about how defenses are public. So if you didn't know that, that's something that you can do to go ahead and learn more about not only the process, but what else is being done and what are they finding that, you know, in their chapter 5, what are they saying that some additional research that could be done in their area might springboard, you know, for you to take a look at. The outside agencies such as ADRA, are you familiar with ADRA? If not, I'm telling you that that's probably one of the best professional memberships that you can take on and ask for your district to maybe help you with, or institution. Because the AERA is about educational research. That's what it is. And so if you can go to their conference, you are going to have a slew of sessions to choose from. I mean, tons, in all areas of education.
Would that be American Educational Research Association?
Yep. Mm-hmm. And the other thing about the AERA is that it's a fabulous place to network. And I know a lot of people who have gotten publications out of either going there and meeting people or going there and presenting. So the ADRA is a fabulous membership to look into, okay? I think that there are big conferences in the spring of the year, all right? Which kind of puts it, for those of you who might defend in the summer months, that would be a great thing to apply for, to go do in that fall, while your research is fresh, both data-wise and mind-wise, okay? Chapter 5 of other dissertations. So you've been learning a lot about ProQuest and other resources, but looking at other people's chapter 5s. We've talked about this in the past, but looking at the references of other articles. Now, the one thing that I do want to kind of caution you about is, and I know one of our textbooks does this, and it just kind of, it's just kind of funny to me, I'll just put it that way. It doesn't grate me the wrong way or anything, but it's just kind of funny that the author continually references himself from another book that he wrote.
Let's do it first person, third person.
He's the best person ever, you know, he knows it all. So it's just kind of funny to me that, you know, somebody would use, I mean, once in a while, if you're like in the book that I just wrote, we did reference a framework but the framework wasn't part of that book, but it was the hub of that book. So we referenced that framework. That makes sense. We're not sitting there referencing ourselves as the experts over and over throughout our own text. So do take a peek at that and just make sure that, you know, that maybe they're not doing that. But so looking at references is another way. You know, professional conversation is such an important thing. And that's one of the things I love about online learning is that there's an engagement expectation. And, you know, you can really learn a lot just by listening. And we heard that this morning through Dr. Schatzberger's devotion with that professional conversation that took place and how that led to much more than we could ever imagine. So just listening to each other and kind of what you were just doing, and that's why I didn't want to interrupt that conversation, because you're from different places geographically, but you have a common interest. And sometimes just that discussion can peak. Well, we don't have that. And is that effective? Why isn't our district doing that? Kind of looking into that more, and then all of a sudden, you know, maybe that leads into some kind of dissertation topic. So professional conversation is really an important part. We already talked about dissertations in another way, so I'll skip that. And we kind of talked about the ADRA being a conference or workshop, but the networking is really what's important. I just had a conversation with Harvard. I was actually accepted to go and do some work there. And it's not going to work out because I don't have $50,000 to drop, but I was accepted and everything. But in conversation with them, one of the things that really stood out to me was their networking. And from the very beginning, you are part of the group and you have access to their resources and you are developing relationships. And so that's a really important part with conferences and workshops. And what you might find too, you know, like you were saying, well, there's only 3 of us who decided on tariffs. Okay, well, if this were dissertation related, perhaps those 3 of you would get together, share your information, and put together a proposal to go present at a conference together. Each of you has a different part, a different expertise, a different concept or skill or something that you were looking at, but together you create a larger picture that could be very, very interesting to your colleagues on a bigger level. So doing something like that. Now, looking at the needs around us is a really important part too. And I shared yesterday with some of you about I'm serving on 10 at the Top. And 10 at the Top is upstate. It's the 10 counties that are here creating upstate. And we're working on teacher recruitment and retention, my particular committee. So when I hear people say, well, I'm interested in looking at mentoring or induction or, you know, recruitment or anything like that, my mind goes to, there's information out there. And here's another thing, it's not new information. One of the reasons I opted to serve on that particular committee is because I've been working on that for almost 10 years up north. Okay. I actually was part in the year before I came down here, I was part of a 5-person task force that directly replied to the governor. And the whole focus was on teacher recruitment and retention. We used data from across the state. If you're not familiar with Illinois, because that's the state that I was serving, if you think of Illinois being long and, you know, like 3/4 of the population is in the top quarter of the state.
Oh, wow.
So there are very rural areas. When we think Illinois, we often think Chicago. But the reality is that there's a lot of rural areas that are having problems, not only recruiting, but offering courses that are keeping their kids in school. Sound familiar? So if we can look at the needs and you know, kind of connect in that way, that's something that we can do as well. And then look at leading scholars. So, you know, when you think of a leading scholar, just throw out names. Who comes to mind? Leading scholars in education.
Heidi Jacobs, Caitlin Tucker, Marzano, Stiggins, Winelli.
There you go.
I'm just kind of going through my Twitter list right now.
Yeah. And that's good. Yeah, I mean, and if you're in social media with them, if you're on LinkedIn with them, whatever, you know, there's other ways that you can connect with them. And just to kind of see what's going on. I think that there's one that I just connected with, so forgive me if I don't get the name right, but it's like Research Bridge or something like that. And I'll get these alerts that my research that I've been doing, that they have record of, might connect with this person.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So, so you know, some of the names I recognize, and some of the names are just like me, where we might be teaching in a university somewhere and not be known, but we're doing work. We're doing good work, you know. So those are some ways that you can search for a topic. Any other things that pop into your mind about when you're searching? Maybe that we might want to add to the list.
I find it's like a trail. Like I find one like good source, and then it leads me to another one and another one, another one.
Mm-hmm. So when you say that, is it because of who's in the reference list?
The references, and just reading through it and seeing what they've used.
Yep. And that's probably the most effective way that I used with mine to get my research. Yep. Any other ideas? Is there anything up here that really resonates with you, or that kind of jumps out to you as something you've not thought about before?
I mean, some of that I've kind of used to decide my big broad thing.
Right.
And truthfully, our last class with Dr. Pugh, that kind of set me on a mission too. When we were talking about contemporary teaching styles and things like that, and the school that I will be working at this year is going one-to-one, and this will be the first time I've ever been one-to-one. And so thinking back to, you know, reading Jacobs' book and looking at flipped classroom blended learning, that's when I just kind of was like, oh, okay, what is there for math? What is there for middle school math? And then I connected with Caitlin Tucker, who's a big blended learning. She's written several books. And I connected with her on Twitter, and she was like, I would love for more math teachers to research this, because I find that math teachers are the hardest to get on board because they can't see how it equates. So I said, well, you got me on board, and so I'm hoping that I'll be able to connect with her in this research when as soon as I get a little bit more narrow, and use her as a resource reference and all of the above. So, I mean, that was from interest, going, well, I'd really like to try this, and Jacobs made a big impact on me. And then it became kind of an obsession, and then leading scholars in the area of interest, Caitlin Tucker. So that's kind of how I use that.
Well, and something that you said too that I just want to share is, don't think that because somebody wrote a book that they're out of touch. I mean, as far as, oh my gosh, you know, they'll never answer my email or whatever. When I was invited to a conference by some colleagues to go see Danielson, and I went up and I met her at that conference. Following that conference, we decided to write a book because as we were sitting at this conference, here's how things developed. As we were sitting at this conference, at the time I was teacher leadership. I had almost between 500 and 1,000 teacher leaders that I was in charge of. But I also had principals and superintendents, okay? And the other two people were also part of Ed leadership, where they were working with the principals and superintendents. And as we were sitting there talking, we're like, you know, so the teachers are always held to these standards, right? these evaluation, Danielson's wonderful framework, and I love her framework, I really do. In a lot of ways, I think it helped to provide direction, okay? But what's out there for admin, and who holds them accountable, and how can they be held accountable if there aren't any targets for them?
I think that's what I wrote about my ethical care was how we forget about care for teachers. Like the admins forget that you've got to take care of people that are in the classroom.
Well, we ended up sitting down and we did our professional conversation, and we ended up, I called Danielson. And I had several conversations with her. She gave me her cell number. And she was also in the UK, so she gave me her UK number. So that led not only to that book, but also a framework for effective teacher leadership, because they're in the same boat. I'm sure a lot of you are teacher leaders, and you don't really fit into that teacher framework anymore because you're doing much more than what's listed there, but you're not considered as admin. You're kind of this quasi, you're in leadership, but you're not admin, okay? So we developed, again, I worked with a different team, and we developed a framework for effective teacher leadership. Both of those were based on conversations I had with Danielson. And Danielson didn't want to leave teachers. She'll do some with teacher leaders now, but she did not want to get into admin. So that's why she wasn't part of our book, but she was more than willing to have conversations with us. I've also had Marzano in my car. I've had Stiggins in my car. I said, I'm going to take that seat and bring it to the Smithsonian and say, these are all the famous people that have been on that seat.
I don't know how to been able to drive.
But they're normal people, they're regular people. And one thing that Marzano said to me, and this really resonated with me, was he said, I can't be an expert in everything, so I surround myself with good people. And when you think about it, we talked about the meta-analyses. He uses other people's work. He's a master at that. He's a master at bringing other experts in and working together as a team. But then his name goes on it. So anyway, so when you think about, looking at authors and using social media, reach out to them. And especially if it's like spot on to what you're thinking, wanting, reach out to them and see if you can make that connection. So we've talked about being passionate. What excites you? What ignites you? That's what I ask. What excites you? What ignites you? Because it has to do that in order for it to keep your attention for such a long time. Okay? Then we look at what the academic literature tells us. And what we want to do is we want to find our niche. Okay? There might be a lot of stuff out there on our topic. But we can still go and we can still find either a gap, or we can find just, I call it a hole, or something that needs to be maybe more developed, okay? And that's where the ideas come from for a dissertation. What is your contribution to your field, okay? And then is your idea framed in the context of a methodical inquiry that permits multiple possible conclusions? We were talking about biases the other day, right? You have to let go of what you think, and you have to look at the possibilities. And we all know that there's 100 roads to wherever that destination is, right? So we have to be open to finding multiple roads there. And then we can go through and we can do our analysis and whatnot. But we have to frame it. A dissertation has to be original work. And so what that means is that you're uncovering new facts or principles. You're suggesting relationships that weren't maybe previously discussed, okay? you challenge, and sometimes people forget that you can do something like this. You challenge something that's existing. Why are we doing this? I was sitting at the table today at lunch. We were talking about assessments, right? Why do we have all of these assessments? Well, I'm going to tell you a little something. I did an assessment audit with one of the school districts that I was working with, that I was sent in, another school district. I was actually sent in, it was a charter school for a UW, I won't say which one, a UW school, University of Wisconsin, that lost their School of Education due to non-compliance. But they were allowed to keep their charter school. And in 4 years, they never turned in a form. This place was a hot mess. But when I came in, I did an assessment audit, and they had no idea why they were even giving some of these tests. Nobody was using the data. They didn't have, they were out of compliance with special ed, they were out of compliance with ELL, and they didn't have a reading specialist, but they were using their title money.
They were.
We're talking like lawsuits here.
Yeah, like major.
Yeah.
And their teachers had never been evaluated in the 12 years that the school was open.
Well, there you
They didn't even have an evaluation system in place. They were using 7 different textbooks.
Who's running this? That's awful.
Well, the person was a director, but did not have a background in education. And that's who was running it. So anyway, the idea is that we want to, I mean, when I came in and I did this audit and I started questioning, do you know the purpose of that test? How are results being used? Who and how are you reporting those results to? We got rid of a whole bunch of stuff, and we put different things in place so that there was a definitive puzzle of dovetailed of how everything worked. And let me tell you, I could count on one hand when we did the audit, this is no lie, I could count on one hand how many days of regular full instruction were going to take place that school year that weren't affected by some kind of testing. After we looked at that audit and made changes, everything was running in a very different way. So all I'm saying is that you can take something that's happening and you can look at a situation and challenge that, and that might very well lead to a dissertation topic. Maybe in that particular situation, it might be because of assessments and how they're being used or how often they're given. Do we know the purpose? Things like that. There might be a niche there for a dissertation. Looking into new insights, the little understood phenomena that are going on, things like that. Suggesting new interpretations. That's another one that sometimes people forget about. So that we can alter people's perceptions of the world around them, okay? So I just wanted to kind of put that out there to let you know that, sometimes we come to a dissertation topic from a different trajectory, So we have to think about it. And you've heard me say this 100 times now, but we have to peel the onion, right? And so one thing that I'll say is right. Because you can always go through and delete, right?
Yeah.
But and I've done this, so I know it happens. I get an idea and I'm like, oh, I'll do that later. I don't remember what I said, and it was so good. I'm sure it was something I could have used. But the moment has passed, and so is the idea. So, write to crystallize and organize your understanding. And that understanding might very well change as you do your research, as you do interactions, right? So it's okay to go back and revise what it is that you've written. but you want to make sure that you're getting stuff down, okay? Make sure that you're dialoguing, having those conversations with your dissertation committee. That's what DCM is, dissertation committee member. Okay, especially your chair, we've talked about that. And some of the questions that they're going to shoot at you are, like I said, I don't know if it was earlier today or yesterday, because I'm sure with you guys too, it's all blending at this point, right? But they're going to ask you, so what? What about that? And all they're doing is they're trying to get you to go deeper, go deeper. You have to filter down to that core. I'm going to tell you this because this is one of the things that I have to tell my students quite often is allow yourself to shift gears. Okay? If you think back to your college years, you might have started in a different area, okay? A different major, and you decided, hey, this really isn't for me, and you changed majors. But you did that because as you got into it, you realized it's not really what you wanted to do. Same concept. Don't feel that you have to stick with that major and become a lawyer when you really wanted to switch and become a teacher, because they're not, they're not the same thing. And you want to be happy with it. The other thing that I have to tell my students sometimes is know when to stop. Because and especially after you get on a roll and you start finding research and you start digging and you get deeper, then all of a sudden you've gone from this to this to this, and now you're digging a hole. Okay? So at some point, your chair might say, you have enough information here, I need to stop you. And if you want to continue, guess what? That goes in your findings, right? That goes in your chapter 5. And that may very well be something that you continue on later after you defend and maybe write a book about, maybe write an article about, or something else. But at some point, your chair might very well say, I need to stop you. Okay? Any questions about that part? Okay. And just some ideas about some things to consider as you're looking at your topic and thinking about it and whatnot. And we've talked about this, and you heard Dr. Trimios say this yesterday, bite-sized. It has to be something that's feasible. You don't want to be collecting data. You don't want to do a longitudinal study where you're going to be watching first graders when they graduate in 8th grade in high school. You'll never finish, right?
Not for a dissertation.
Not for a dissertation, right? So it has to be something that's feasible that you can do within a certain amount of time, okay? And that's why it's important to have a conversation with your chair, with your full committee, but especially with your chairs, that they're going to guide you and they're going to help you make sure that it's something that can be done within a timely manner. Okay? And that hits the second bullet too. The other thing is making sure that you have data that's obtainable. You might have a great idea, but guess what? There might be restrictions that keep you from being able to use that data. Just like Dr. Trimios yesterday said, as soon as she changed, she all of a sudden didn't have access to that data anymore. Okay? So you have to consider what you need to do. And the other thing to get the permissions, but the other thing that I'll say is, I have this situation with a young lady I'm working with right now, who I've been working with for 3 years. She's awesome, she has great ideas. And I asked her if she had permission she was going to do a case study with 2 universities. Well, it turned out that she never got the actual permission. And so when we thought she was going to be ready to defend, I said, you have to have certain things for your IRB, so we need those permissions on file. And she came back and she said, Well,
Oh,
I can't. So we didn't change her dissertation, okay? But what we had to do was to search for a school that would allow her, and hers is special ed in the higher ed community. And so she's going to be working with DePaul University. Okay, it's a good university, but she's going to do a case study of one university instead of multiple, and it's not even the one that she originally identified. So you have to make sure, and this is, slowed her down a little bit, probably between 3 and 6 months. She's been working on finding something else. So, be honest up front, be, thinking about the permissions that you need to have, okay? Make sure that you align your methodology. What you don't want to do is get into it and realize that, well, this isn't collecting the data that I need or in the way that I need to have it done, right? So be very thoughtful and use your methodologists. That's what they're there for, okay? Have them ask you the tough questions up front, early on, okay? You learned a lot about R today. Are you thinking that it's something that you might be able to use in your?
yes.
Potentially.
It's pretty cool, isn't it?
And we knew what the values meant.
Right.
It was super, like this morning was super
Right.
awesome, like knowing this is the age, this is this, this is this. The data was like this afternoon, we didn't know what things meant. I'm like 1 to 4, but what's 1 and what's 4, and nobody
Right.
knows.
Yeah, so going back to that.
That document, right. But I mean,
It didn't explain it all there.
it was super long.
And we're still trying to dig.
But if we compile the data, then.
Right.
If you're compiling the data.
Yeah, I feel like if we find data that we know about, and we
Yeah.
know everything, it's gonna be easier for us to be able to interpret that
Right.
data. Because I'm sitting here going, I can tell you what this box plot means, as far as quartiles, median, and all of this, because I'm a math teacher. However, exactly what the data means
Yes.
itself, individually, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is the median of this 6th grade, but I can't tell you anything else other than that.
Or what do you do when they don't answer? That portion.
Yeah.
Do you throw it all out? You keep.
Well, that's part
I
of
think that's
your,
where you had to
that's part of
take
your
it out.
analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a code to take things out. I have it written somewhere.
Well, there's a code to take the NA out, but when they add a bunch of -8s in there instead.
He's gonna tell us that tomorrow.
Tomorrow,
Yeah.
I know.
Tomorrow.
I'll go home and do
I'm actually
I can't.
gonna mention that in my reflection of thank God for today and thank you for tomorrow. Because I have a better when we first did it and we looked at that hour-long video and it looked, and there were 469 commands when he was doing one thing. I'm like, wait, how did you get 469 commands? I haven't even got how to get there, and you're showing me all this stuff that it can do. That's great, but I don't know how to get there. So that part was overwhelming. I'm like, there's no way. I'm gonna have to have a full course because it looks impossible right now.
Mhm.
Today made me feel better. And I know that we can get there, but I still need to know how to get from point A to point B before I can do a moving histogram, That part was intimidating, but I feel better now, a little bit.
Were the wheels turning for you about, I can do.
I'm gonna use it for this and this and this.
Yeah.
Audrey was turning on, how can I use this in my classroom? Hey, I could show my kids this way to build.
Especially in 8th grade.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Plots and correlations to our values.
And it's
And then
free.
even 7th grade, with reality, you still have to do basic statistical measures and generate plots and be able to read them and interpret them. So I was like, I could do, thinking of all these ideas, so.
Yeah.
My brain went there instead of here.
And then just going back and just making sure that you're utilizing your dissertation committee members. They are there for you. They are resources for you. They each have their own expertise. They also have connections, right? So make sure that you're having those conversations. Don't be shy. Don't worry that you're asking too many questions or anything else. That's what they're there for, all right? So those are some considerations. And then just a couple of truisms. First of all, you're gonna encounter a wide range of opinions, These are both out of Roberts. Regarding the worth of any dissertation topic, everybody has an opinion.
Yes.
Okay? Some are gonna think it's outstanding, some are gonna think it stinks. And that's the bottom line, right? So, you really have to, you think about that, but the bottom line is that, you only have to satisfy yourself and your dissertation committee. Okay? So if people are expressing an opinion at work, or if you are trying to collect data and people are sharing their opinion, you can politely say, thank you, I'll take that into consideration, and do what you gotta do, right? The other thing that I just want to touch on, and again, this is from Roberts, is stubbornness in pursuing a dissertation topic no one believes worthy of research can lead to ABDism. So, time spent pursuing a lost cause can cost you valuable time and make it difficult to obtain an advisor. So, if the horse is dead, get off of it, in other words, right?
Right.
And I'll say that this is really true as a committee member. I've had a couple of people with really strong personalities, of which, I mean, let's be honest, most of us in here are type A's, right? Because that's just who we are as leaders and as people. But if your committee, especially your committee chair, is telling you to do something, remember yesterday I said you might win the battle, but you might not win the war, right? So really take into consideration, how is this going to affect my dissertation? If I dig my heels and I tell my chair that this is absolutely the way that I want it or need it, how is that going to affect me finishing my dissertation? Okay. Now, if you have a reason behind it, I mean, if you've been doing your research and maybe you have some more current information than what your committee has, and you want to express that, they'll listen. Okay, and they might even change their mind and say, "Yeah, run with it." But there are more situations that I've seen, not necessarily with myself, but just other situations that I've seen where it can be very trying for a person to take on a dissertation committee member. Okay, you don't want it to be where you go into your defense and you're attacked by a committee member. And I've only seen that once, and I wasn't on the committee, but I've seen it once, and it's just not a pretty sight at all. It's not good for anybody, So, so just think about, your position and how you're presenting it. A lot of it is in presentation, how you bring that information forward to your committee. How you have those conversations. If it's a tough conversation, you might want to Zoom with the person, or, make sure that you're using a phone or Zoom rather than texting or emailing. Mm-hmm. Because you tend to get better conversation with the other means, other methods.
Because of your tone.
Your tone is huge, yeah. And I know I'm guilty of that sometimes too. I'll try to answer very quickly for an email because I only have a minute, and maybe it doesn't come out the right way. So.
Or whatever, wherever your mind is, that's how you're reading it.
Yeah.
Even if their mind's not there.
Yep, and that's true. So as we close up, hopefully you got something out of the session, even though you might have had an idea of what you want to do for your topic. Hopefully there was something in here that kind of resonated with you. Any questions before we move on to the next?
And that's available on our.
It is on the portal. Yep. All right. Then you have about 10 minutes until your next session, I believe. And yes. And then you'll be off for the day.
I'll say, for me, it kind of helped confirm
how I'm going about trying to choose my topic with interest in literature and like things that grab my attention that I just cannot let go of now. So I appreciate that part. That helps me go, okay, you are kind of thinking in the right direction because it is something that you're going to be able to do because of your passion and interest. I appreciate that.
I totally, after having our conversations with potential committee members, totally 180 on what I thought I wanted to do.
Ah,
And I've been thinking the same thing, like I teach English, my whole life has been based around literacy. And I'm like, that's where I'm going, that's what I want. And I'm like, no. Like I've been mentoring, and I love working with first year teachers, and I see so many things there. And I was like, that's what I'm doing. Like it took me a while, like the rest of the day, I was like, I'm really doing this, like yeah, that's where I'm gonna go.
one last thing, if you guys can kind of spread the word, that we have some books that were borrowed. And if you know somebody who borrowed a book, either just have them bring it tomorrow or just shoot us an email or a little note to let us know where it's at so that we'll get it back eventually, because we don't mind that you're reading them, we want you to read them, but just so that we know who has them. Be great. All right, have a good afternoon. See you tomorrow.
Talking about the books from the back of the room over there.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I have the grip book.
Oh, okay. Are you gonna use it yet?
I was gonna read it at the beach. If
Can you,
that's okay.
can you just shoot me an email that you got it, and then I'll get it back.
Take it to you.
Yeah. Reading about grit. I love that book. And you know what? I've used some of her, a couple of her quotes and stuff like that. I you know what I mean?
Dr. Shelford.
Todd, where are you going?
Somebody's got to bring up the rear. I like for it to be me. You might write on this board as if there's not an obvious difference between that committee board and that whiteboard sitting right next to it.
They would if
If somebody's not reading, doesn't pay attention, I get it. I mean,
somebody's done it, I would have.
Look at that. I'm not reading Facebook, I'm looking at my time.
You have a board.
What's that?
You have a board back in.
I do.
Bye.
Life is good. All right. So I think that this is our group. They've been around 7 or 8 in each group, so we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome to identifying a topic. And so my first question to you is, how many of you feel that you have a pretty solid idea of the topic that you want to do for your dissertation? It's about half. This doesn't count. Okay. Yeah.
I would say I'm 90% sure until I talked to my wife, and then I became somewhat unsure, and then went back to being sure.
Okay.
So her suggestion was, you're going to have to do a lit review anyway. Why don't you start seeing what's out there? Because then you'll decide if it's too big, what to do, if it's too small. And then I was like, well, then I don't know. And then she's like, just go read something and then figure it out.
Well, and that's good advice, and actually she hit the nail on 2 heads here. So we're gonna look at that a little bit more. But the idea is, don't worry if you don't know exactly what it is that you want to do, because we keep saying it's a process, right? And especially if you're in the January cohort, you are just getting your feet wet. You're in the baby pool. We're not going to push you off the high dive yet, okay? So, but we do push them off the high dive at some point, don't we, Jeffrey?
Absolutely. Thank you for.
I'm a lifeguard. See?
Is that your title? I didn't know that.
So there's a couple things that I want to go through here that are just kind of foundational to identifying a topic that sometimes, even though they're foundational, we don't really think about them as being maybe an avenue for us to identify our topic. So first and foremost is our own interests and passions, okay? Because, and you've heard this throughout the week, it has to be something that interests you. It has to be something you're passionate about, because the reality is that you're gonna live it. You're gonna live with it, you're gonna live for it. It's gonna be part of your life for however long it takes you to collect your data, analyze it, and write your last couple chapters, okay? So it has to be something that you really love and are passionate about and can live it. The other thing is to kind of look at some professional journals, which is kind of what Josh was saying just a few minutes ago. Go see what's out there, all right? And, you know, in your library sessions and in research tools, which the first cohort will have this fall, you create those folders, and you just start putting articles of interest in there. Whether or not you use them later, that's okay if you don't use them, right? They're not taking up any space on your desk or in your bookshelf or anything else. Digital, they're in a folder. You can delete them if you don't use them, okay? I literally, because I was doing mine, and I am a visual person, so I literally had totes. And by totes, I mean, you know, the totes, the Christmas totes. I actually just got rid of those because I couldn't let them go, because it was all my stuff, all my articles and everything else that I had been collecting for my dissertation. And I did use them throughout the years to do other things. You know, when I was writing my books, when I was working with staff, staff development, things like that. I dug into there because I knew it back and forth, right? So use those professional journals to really develop your thoughts and massage those ideas about what you might want to do. The other day I was talking about defenses. Defenses are public. So proposal defense, final defense, those are public. The public is not allowed to ask questions, but you are allowed to attend. Even if it's a Zoom, you can attend, okay? Even if it's another university, you can attend. So, you know, use that as an opportunity to see what happens, what kinds of questions are asked, where their research brought them, and what they're saying needs to be done yet. Okay? So use your colleagues as a tool, as a resource. Outside agencies, the ADRA, how many of you are familiar with ADRA? Okay. ADRA is phenomenal because it's educational research. And so this conference is probably one of the largest, if not the largest, that I know of that is specific to educational research. Their conference is usually in the spring, I believe, with proposals due in the fall. So if and when you finish your dissertation in the summer, you could go ahead and write your proposal and summer residency 3 to present at the AERA. The proposal would be due that fall. The presentation would be the next spring. Hi.
I didn't want to surprise you. I thought I'd snap a candid shot or two.
Absolutely, come on in.
With you in.
Oh, with me in
With
it?
you in.
Oh, do you want me to? about the ADRA. I know of a lot of people because I've been a member of it, and I also have friends colleagues who not only present there pretty regularly, but have networked through there and ended up writing articles or books with other people because of this is a phenomenal network, and everybody there is interested in research. So the ADRA is a great membership to maybe ask your district or institution if there's a possibility of them helping you to get that membership, especially while you're going through this process. Okay. Now there's other memberships out there, other professional organizations that are great, I'm sure, and especially if it's an area that maybe if you're a math teacher and you have the national math. I'm not going to remember all the acronyms, but
NCT or NCT.
Thank you. So so if you're going to do your dissertation in your content area, you know what memberships might be of value to you. Okay, but the ADRA is definitely one that you should maybe look into at this point in your journey. Okay, and then Chapter 5 of other dissertations, and this kind of goes along with right across with dissertations and ProQuest. So go into ProQuest, and even if you only read Chapter 5 of other people's dissertations, just to kind of see what is it that they are saying, their findings or lack of findings, and what they're saying needs to be done yet, because you might very well find your niche and be able to springboard off of their research, okay? If it's an older study, is it something you can replicate and see where they're at today with that? Because things change, right? So Chapter 5 of other dissertations. References of articles. This is by far the best way that I got information, is as I found articles or books that were really good and were I was compelled by them, spot on with my research area and everything else, then I would look at the resources of that book or article and go and find those primary sources. And that's one of the ways that I built my library. Now, one caution, and this is kind of funny to me because one of our textbooks does this, and I won't tell you which one. But it's kind of funny to me because the person uses uses the lead author as the most referenced person in the book, using that author's works, different books that author has written. So they don't deviate much into other people's work.
It's sort of,
Yeah,
it's sort of like circular argument.
Yeah.
Type deal. I'm using my own stuff to validate my own stuff.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I'm the creator.
Why would I disagree with myself?
So you do want to kind of just keep an eye on that, just make sure that they are looking at other people. I've only found that a very small number of times, but it is something to kind of keep your, just be aware of. The next one is the interest of your supervisor or colleague. And one of the things that I'll say about this is the importance of professional dialogue, okay? When you think about it, if you're in a school district, having a conversation with the head of your department, with your superintendent, your principal, what do we need? If I have to do research, do you have an area that's in the back of your mind about something that you'd like to find out more about? Now, that doesn't mean that you can automatically do that, because your dissertation has to be it has to meet some criteria. But just having that dialogue could certainly spark some interest in you about, oh, I didn't think about that. The other thing is just having those professional conversations. I mean, in the last group that was here, there were 3 math teachers, and I just let them go for the first 5-10 minutes of class, because they were talking about specific things that were meaningful to them, and they were in different districts. And something like that could very well spark an idea about, well, we don't have that. Why don't we have that? What might we need to do? Did you find that effective? You know? So just keeping that part, you know, that professional dialogue in mind. Going to conferences and workshops, I've found to be very helpful. I mean, people are there because they have a love of learning, and you don't know exactly what they might be bringing to those sessions as far as opportunities to not only kind of hear what's going on, but again, hearing what's not going on or what's missing, and that provides an opportunity too for you to just kind of think, well, that might be a good topic for me to look into more. Okay. A need, and this goes back to professional dialogue with, you know, maybe a superintendent or whatever, but for example, teacher retention. And I know I talked to a group, and I said, I don't know if it was earlier today or yesterday, because it all blends at this point. But I purposely joined 10 at the top, and that is it's the 10 counties that make up the upstate area. And I purposely joined their teacher retention and recruitment committee. Now, I did that because, of course, we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the area and we're having this professional dialogue and whatnot. But another reason that I joined is because we've been doing this up north for at least 7 to 10 years, having these conversations. And 2 years ago, I served on a task force of 5 that directly reported to the governor of Illinois on teacher recruitment and retention. We use data from across the state of Illinois. We use national data because our students who were finishing in our schools were going to other states to teach. Why? Okay. Something else about Illinois, because this was for the state of Illinois, I work both with Wisconsin and Illinois. When we think of Illinois, we pretty much think of what? Chicago. Chicago is Illinois. But the reality is that if you think about Chicago, just right underneath Chicago, there's I-80. And about 3/4 of the population of Illinois is in the top quarter of the state. So Illinois is very much so a rural state. They're having problems recruiting teachers. They're having problems offering courses that students are interested in. They're having problems keeping their kids in school because they don't get the classes that they want to take. Sound familiar? So we've been working on that for at least 7 years that I can think of. I was trying to think back to see. But 10 at the top has just been working on it. From what I see in this last year, they've really put their committees together to start having these conversations. So I can bring some information into the group, but I'm also listening to the needs of what has to be done here and where my niche might be, where I can help them do some research here. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that we want to look at. Another example is that, Jeffrey, we were at lunch, our table was talking a lot about assessment, right? Good gravy, we have assessments galore, right? And when you think about it, you know, do we know why we're given the assessments, or how they're being used, how they're being reported, who they're being reported to?
I can think of 2 reasons.
Okay.
Accountability, money. Because the testing companies make money off of it. So I don't foresee them going away.
Well, but the idea is that we might have to give them, but we can be more efficient and effective with how we do it and what we're doing and what choices we do have. And I'll give you an example. I remember I told you that the state of Illinois had me come in and I had 2 years to turn around District 187. Well, following that, I had 2 years to turn around to charter school from a UW that lost, I won't say which one, but it's in the news, that lost its School of Education due to non-compliance with the Department of Education. But they got to keep their charter school. And for 4 years, that charter school didn't even submit any kind of report. So I was sent in, and they had 7 different math textbooks being used. Their teachers had never been evaluated in the 12 years that the school was open. They didn't even have an evaluation system.
They had no comments, that's what.
They had, no. And they were out of compliance in special ed. They were out of compliance in ELL. They didn't even have a reading specialist on site, but they were using title funds. And they had, one of the first things I did was a needs assessment, and part of that was an assessment audit. Now, if you've not done an assessment audit, I highly recommend that you do one. Because what I found when I did it was that, and this goes back to our conversation at lunch, there were probably 5 days throughout the whole school year that didn't have some kind of assessment scheduled. And yet, they were a hot mess. What were they, so why are you giving these assessments? Who's using them? You don't even have special ed people doing, it was just a hot mess. So one of the first things I did after this assessment was the assessment audit was done, was I came through and sat down with the teachers, and we decided on a specific area to start on with curriculum, getting rid of 7 different math textbooks. But the other thing we did was we talked about what we needed to keep and what we needed to say goodbye to and could say goodbye to as far as assessments goes, and what we needed to bring in to give us better data to help us bring our students to a new level. And then make sure that we had professional development to support that so that the teachers knew how to use that data. And I put PLCs in place. And those PLCs were not a time to do doctor appointments or take your kids to the dentist. They were time for us to discuss what those results were and what we were going to do in the classrooms. Okay, so we go back to how does this all lead? It's professional discussion. It leads to discussion about assessment. Why do we have these assessments? Can we get rid of them? Can we use them more effectively? What can we get rid of? And that may very well lead into a dissertation topic. Hey, my teachers are burnt out. My teachers feel that they don't have instructional time. When I was with District 187, one thing that really stood out was instructional time. They were there for less than 6.5 hours a day, and probably, I think that it was just under 2 hours of it was them letting the kids sit there, and I'm like, so you're down to 3.5 hours of instruction a day, whether it was lunch or, they let the kids come in when they were ready to come in. It was like craziness. Hey, whenever you're ready, come on in for school, it was just crazy.
I would say there's places in South Carolina that operate like that.
I would say, from personal experience, there are colleges in South Carolina
Well,
that do that.
No, I'm just kidding.
I want to hush.
No, you can feel free.
I no longer work there because I've taken a position at another university, but yeah, my former institution, it's a college here in South Carolina, part of our technical college system. And sadly, they have just gotten so lax on things that it's just like, just as long as your check clears, we will give you a diploma.
Yeah.
It's kind of gotten, it's not that bad, but it's headed there
Yeah.
if things don't shift or change.
Right. And we go back to accountability. It is up to us, it is up to us to make sure that we are.
That was one of the things I heard one of my science teachers in the 8th grade just harp on this year. was the district has moved to common assessment using Master Connect. So now we're benchmarking the kids, it's supposed to be closer to what they actually take on the final standardized test at the end of the year.
Okay.
But her argument still is the same. You're gonna make me standardized test these kids at the end of the year, but I have no way to correct it. Because by the time she gets the data back, the kid's already a freshman. How can she's like, if you gave me a standardized test in October that was 20 questions long,
Right.
that I could get the data back in a couple of weeks, adjust, and then do it again
Right.
mid-year, then do it again. Then she felt like, because she's already having the benchmark 3 times a year, that's more money well spent versus a 60-question test that takes 3 hours 1 day a year that does her no benefit, but yet her job is held to it.
Well, and you just brought up another good point stemming from like doing an audit, and that's formative versus summative assessment. And that's a huge, it's a huge deficit if you're getting scores at the end of the year and you're putting them in a cume folder and you can't, you're sending the cume folders on to the next teacher or the next grade level or whatever. But if we have that data available to us and we can do something about it, yes, absolutely, then it's meaningful, But, I'm going to say something about that because, I don't know about y'all, but when I went through my undergrad, I had 1 assessment class, and I didn't think anything of it, But you get out into the real world and, so in those days, and I'm dating myself a little bit. You guys were asking me how old I was yesterday. But we gave the CAT test. I don't know if you remember the CAT test, Iowa Basics and CAT test. You're looking at me like, no, that's like 1950. Yeah, California assessment. Well, we got those test scores. If we were lucky, we got them back while the kids were, getting ready to get on the bus for the summer. Sometimes we got them in the summer. So they were of no use to us. But one thing I did as a young teacher that I didn't know it was good practice back then, I just did it because it made sense, was I went through and I did basically what's an item analysis. And then that way I could adjust my curriculum for the next year and whatnot, So here's my point. I wasn't a researcher back then, but you have to allow yourself to have professional conversations and to allow your professionalism to do what is right. Nobody taught me to do that, but it made sense to me that if I wanted to make a difference, I had to maybe change my curriculum or teach something earlier, readjust something based on my data that I was getting back from my students, So anyway, so be open to professional conversations, be open to needs in your district or school, because a region, and remember dissertations have to look at the bigger picture, not just a school or a classroom, but the bigger picture. But a lot of times what's happening in your classroom is happening district or region wide, right? So it could be very well lead to a dissertation topic. Finally, just looking at leading scholars. And when I say leading scholars, who comes to mind for you? Say it. Just throw it out. Who comes to mind as a leading scholar? No, just well, it can be on your topic, but just Burns,
Eric Jensen.
Marzano.
Gallagher.
Okay, so we have people in our mind. What I'm going to say about that is don't be afraid to contact those people. And you might look at me and say, well, what kind of drugs are you on today? But the idea is that they're people just like us, okay? And I've had personal experiences with people. For example, Marzano was in my car, Stiggins was in my car. I said I'm going to save that seat and give it to the Smithsonian, but here's another thing. I went to, and this kind of goes with this, I went to a conference with, I was invited to, not a conference, I was invited to a discussion one night with Danielson. And I knew about her, but I wasn't really, at that time, my position didn't really call for me to do anything with Danielson's framework and stuff, but I was aware of her framework, I liked it and whatnot. And I was working with between 500 and 1,000 teacher leaders and another 400 or 500 principal prep, and then a handful of superintendent prep. So it was educational leadership. Well, Danielson's framework is for teachers. But I went with my colleagues, and we were sitting there, and they were also in the same program. We went up and we talked to her afterwards. And after that discussion, with the four of us standing there talking, we went back and we sat down at a table in another room, and we were talking, and we said, you know what? You know what's not fair is that teachers are held accountable, and they're put on this evaluation system. And, you know, they have Danielson's framework as a guide. But then you get to the, you know, admin, and how are they evaluated? What are they accountable for, and to who? We started having this conversation, and it led for us to develop the book, Transforming Professional Practice. That's how we started that book. We went back, and I went back, and I asked Danielson, I said, do you have a card? She gave me her phone number. She gave me her cell phone, and she gave me a UK number because she was over in the UK doing some workshops. I had multiple conversations with her. We ended up developing a framework for effective leadership. When I was done with that project with those colleagues, I was working with all of these teacher leaders that I realized they didn't know what their targets were, because they're not really teachers anymore. They have more duties than what teachers do, but they weren't considered admin. They were this quasi-leadership group. So I went with a different group, and we started doing the other book, Identifying and Growing Internal Leaders. And that's a framework for effective teacher leadership. So from these professional conversations, I'm not writing dissertations, but I could have. I could go out there and I could do research and show the need for this. And my framework would be a product of that. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things I did was Amanda Trimios yesterday. She was actually my doc student, and she invited me to teach to lead. She nominated me to go there. And I was sharing with Reverend Williams yesterday that I get to the conference, and all of a sudden she and I are in the room that they filmed House of Cards in the conference room. I have no idea, I have to say. But I sat down, I was invited to join this conversation. I sat down in this chair, and they're like, did you know that you're in the chair that so-and-so sat in? I'm like, no. But I was in there with Ruth Ann, who was the assistant to John King. I was in there with the person in charge of national boards, the person in charge of, who else is in there? I was in there with Maddie Fennell, who's now with National Teacher of the Year, but she was with the Department of Education at the time. And then there was somebody else too. And I'm having this conversation. Now, if I called them up or if I emailed them and said, hey, this is Dr. Strike, can I sit down and chat with you? And let's do it in that conference room that House of Cards was filmed in. They'd be like, no. But networking, professional conversations, it allowed me to go in, and Amanda was supposed to, this is the research that she was saying disintegrated when she moved. But we got permission to do our research through Teach to Lead. Now, when she moved and she couldn't do it for her dissertation, that left me asking, how strongly do you believe in this research? Are you going to let it go, or are you going to do it yourself? I did it myself. And that led as a chapter, there's a whole chapter in the book devoted to the research and the findings. Okay? So it's not only about doing the dissertation. That's going to be your product. That's going to be, what gives you the title. But it's about how we're transforming our profession. Okay. So any other comments or questions or anything not on the list that you would say, hey, let's put this on the list? All right. Then this is what we've been talking about, but I just put it on a slide here for us. That you have to think about what excites you, what ignites you, because that is going to be part of your life. We talked about it. You're going to live it. You have to love it. What does the literature tell us? And Todd, you were talking about that. Your wife said, go out and you start reading. It'll come to you, and that's what happens. So read. And then find your niche. When you're doing all this reading, what are you seeing that's missing? What's not there? That you're thinking, you know what, I'd really like to know about this, but I'm not finding anything in there about that. It has to be a contribution to the field. And here's the other part, is that it has to be framed in a context of a methodical inquiry that permits multiple possibilities. Okay, so yesterday one of the groups asked me about biases. Well, if we come in and we're only trying to prove something, then you're not allowing it to have multiple possibilities. You're not allowing your research to really do what it's meant to do. Okay, so you have to, we talk about there are many paths to the same destination, so you have to allow your research to actually take place and to show you and kind of reveal to you what the findings or lack of findings are. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're thinking about your topic. It has to be an original work, but there's a lot of things that you can do that are considered original that sometimes we don't think about. So I wanted to make sure we talked about these. You can uncover new facts, of course. That's kind of where our mind goes when we think about research, right? But you can suggest relationships. You can look at existing truths and challenge them. All right? Assumptions. You can look at new insights into things that are maybe not well understood, or suggest new interpretations of information. Okay, so there's a lot of different things that you can do that still fall under the idea of original work for a dissertation. And I keep telling you, peel the onion, peel the onion. And so when the top thing that I would say here is to write, just write. And you can call it free writing, you can call it brainstorming or whatever, but I know for a fact from my own experience that there have been times, especially when I'm writing my books, that, I'll lay there in the middle of the night and this brilliant idea will come to me. And because I'm too tired to get up and write it down, I get up the next morning and I'm like, what was I going to say? It was so good. And now I'm not going to have it down on paper, right? So not that you have to get up at 2 in the morning and write, but make sure that you are writing down your ideas, because you know what? You can always go back and delete it. You can always go back and revise it. You can always go back and just cross it out or do whatever it is that you want to do. But if it's not written down, it's harder to come up with the ideas as you're going through. So just write, and then go back and see how it all fits. Make sure that you're having your dialogues with your dissertation members, okay, especially your chair. And they should be asking you questions like, so what? What about that? Go deeper. And they're not doing that to be mean. They're doing that to see what it is that you're, what's in your head. Where are we going with this? And are we there yet? Are we there yet? Right? But there's 2 things I want to share with you about that. One is to allow yourself to shift gears, because I want to bring you back to your undergrad days. You may have started out in a whole different content area or a whole different major, right? But you had the courage to say, well, I don't really want to do that, right? And so you had the courage to change your major and do what it is that you love doing. Just because you did a pilot study in Research 1 on this topic does not mean that you are stuck with that topic, okay? So just know that you have the opportunity to switch gears. Your chair will support you in that. It's better to do it at the beginning, than to do it later on or say, oh my gosh, this is just, I can't live with this thing anymore. I just want to throw it out the window, right? So you want to make sure that you're allowing yourself to shift if you need to. The other thing is a good chair is going to stop you. And what I mean by that is once you get going in your topic, you are going to get going. And you are going to want to keep going. And at some point, a good chair will say, look, you're done. We're going to stop here. You are going to defend on this. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have some great ideas to keep going, but make that your book. Make that your paper.
I was told that in my master's thesis when I was doing it for Winthrop.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Dr. Eklund or Dr. Jones, one of them who was on my committee.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, save this for your book.
Yeah.
Just focus right here.
Right. Because, sometimes we say go from here to here to here, but then what we start to do is we start to dig down and we end up digging ourselves into a hole. And that hole could go all the way to China. So we need to have a good chair to say, hey, you know what, you've got it. We don't want to be setting up a longitudinal study with kindergartners and testing them in 8th grade and high school. You know what I mean? So we have to know the boundaries here. Which brings us to this last part, and that is that what I just said has to do with these first 2 points. Your chair is going to help you understand and make sure that what your topic is feasible and it's within a timeline, because we don't want this to be a lifelong project. That's not the idea, okay? You're a lifelong learner, but this isn't a lifelong project, all right? So make sure that you keep in mind, like Dr. Trimio said yesterday, bite-size. It's a bite-size dissertation, okay? The permissions. I just had this with this young lady that I'm working with, one that I shared with some of you before. She told me, and I'm her chair, I'm her second chair, but she told me that she had the permissions to do her study, and we were getting ready for her to defend, and I said, you're going to need X, Y, and Z for your IRB. I need to see those permissions. And she didn't really have them. Ooh. And it turned out that she is, now we didn't have her change her whole dissertation, but we did have her change her who she was sampling, her case study. So instead of doing 2 universities and looking at those 2 universities and how they were meeting the needs of special needs students, she is now doing 1 university who she has the permission of, okay? But that's how important it is to make sure that you have the permissions. That IRB is not going to pass without that permission on file. So she put herself back 3 to 6 months because then she had to find somebody else because she didn't really talk to the universities. Now, she thought, well, I have this relationship with them. I know the person in this department, so they'll let me do it. But there were stipulations on the data that she needed where they couldn't release that to her. So she's working with DePaul University. So she's gonna have a good study, but it's gonna be 1 case study instead of multiple. Make sure that you align your methodology. Use your methodologists. Use them early on. Have that discussion about what it could look like, options, and what you're comfortable with, what you think is going to bring you the best data, rich data. Okay. How'd you like our session today? Pretty cool, isn't it? Yeah. How many of you think you might use it in some way, shape, or form for your dissertation? Yeah, super. It's pretty cool. And it's free. How many of you think you might be able to use it with your students?
I'm thinking in terms of like, looking at grades, semester to semester, or even within a class to kind of, process some of that data so that I can go back and, because I always reflect back every semester on my teaching practices and what worked, what didn't work, what could be tweaked, those types of things. I'm sure we all do that. But, I can see that really helping display the data so that I can see trends and things quicker.
Yeah.
And, I really like it.
Yeah, very cool. So hopefully you got something out of there for, whether it's our stats and, coding, analyzing, whatever it is that your need is. Reporting some nice things in there about plots, the tables and graphs that are excellent visuals for your reader. Easy enough to do, So keep that in mind. And then we just go back and we, use those dissertation committee members. And the final slide is just on truisms. And there's two things here, and this is from Robert, so it's not me talking, but I ran into this and I thought these are good to share and just keep in mind. But number one, the basic idea of that one is everybody has an opinion. And so if you're sharing your dissertation topic and, you're going to have some people jump on board and say, oh my gosh, we need that information. It's awesome that you're doing it. Maybe I'll even have you come talk in my district or whatever. But you're going to have some people act as if, well, why are you doing that? What kind of topic is that? That has no value. Don't let them interfere with your process, because the only one that you need to make sure is on board is yourself and then your committee of 3. Okay, that's all that matters. All right, because once it goes through that process and your research, they can go ahead and they can criticize it or do whatever they want to. All right, but you have the title. They still have to call you doctor. I love that.
You might not like it, but.
The other thing is, and this is just a kind of cautionary thing, is stubbornness. And so it can lead to ABDism. You have to get along with your committee and especially your chair. So I kind of alluded to this in a couple different sessions. You might win the battle, but you're not going to win the war if you're taking on your committee, especially your chair. I've only seen the ugliness once, and I wasn't on the committee, but it was a colleague of mine, and he was very critical. And, the person thought that they could bypass him, even though he was appointed to the committee. And he took the person down at the defense. And so we don't want that for anybody. It's the only time I've ever seen it.
I appreciate that. It's the only time I've ever seen it.
It's the only time I've ever seen it. And I'm not saying it was right. And the chair, because he was not the chair, could have handled it differently and better. You know what I mean? Knowing that he was the way he was. You know what I mean? But the idea is that we just want to make sure that that you're progressing. And so if your committee members are telling you, to do something, my recommendation is to listen, revise or whatever. If you have a reason, and I'm being serious about this, but, if you're doing research and it's current research and it's beyond, it's so new that maybe your committee members aren't familiar with it, then share that with them and just say, this is why I want to do this, and then let it be up to the committee to, decide if what direction that you should take. But I just kind of want to put it out there, to listen. And if they say to move on, as we say, if the horse dies, get off of it, So don't hang on to it, move on, okay? So those are the two little truisms I just wanted to share. So, so any questions, comments, any stories you want to tell, anything? Did you get something out of this that was different than what you've heard before? Okay. All right. The PowerPoint is on your portal, all right, and they are recording, so they won't know who made the comment. All right, well, I am done with my session, so I welcome you to go ahead and I'll see you tomorrow morning, bright and early.